Hello, everyone, and welcome to the For the Love of Language podcast. I am Stacy,
And I'm EJ.
and we are so happy to have you here. We are going to talk about something that was actually requested by a parent of ours, and we kind of wanted to dive into it and discuss it a little bit. We love it when we get recommendations from people, so please slide into our DMs, get involved. Tell us what you want to hear.
When you say a parent of ours, it makes it sound like we're siblings.
I wouldn't complain if we were siblings. We are not siblings, by the way. We are not genetically related, as far as I'm concerned. As far as I know, I don't think we're genetically related. But that would be kind of cool if we were. I would say no to having EJ as a sibling. But right into our DMs. Let us know what kinds of topics you're interested in looking at and interested in hearing about. Because today we're going to talk about lingua francas. Hey, EJ, what's a lingua franca?
Well, what a good question, Stacy.
Those are two weird words.
Yeah, so we use, the actual term lingua franca is from Latin, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because we use all sorts of Latin phrases when we're talking about technical things
we
because
do.
that's just a thing we do.
Well, it's a thing that we do because at one point the language of science was Latin because of like their religion and Catholicism and all that fun stuff. There's a whole history behind why we use Latin phrases, but we use Latin phrases for sciencey things.
Yes. Anyways, a lingua franca is a language that is just used as a common language between groups of people. So sort of like an international language, a language of trade, a language of communication between various linguistic groups. And so historically, there's been a lot of different lingua francas in the world. French was at one point one of the
French
big
was
ones.
the lingua franca. The reason it's called a lingua franca is because of French. Because at one point,
Exactly.
French was the language that you needed to know to communicate with people anywhere in the world. Well,
Right?
in anywhere within your world.
Yeah, and there's parts of the world that didn't apply to, obviously, but it was a
Right.
very, very widespread kind of international language.
Yeah. So much so that we have a phrase for it.
Exactly. Versus now, I think a lot of people would say that the most common lingua franca for at least, Europe and a good portion of the world is English.
Yes. English is a global language and is spoken almost everywhere to one extent or another. And it was specifically requested that we talk about kind of English as a global language. And I kind of just broadened that to lingua francas in general because English is spread in a very unique way, but lingua francas are also just a very interesting topic because they can vary from culture to culture, region to region,
Mm-hmm.
and variety to variety.
Definitely. There's like a lot of different directions that we could go with this. But let's just talk a little bit first about how a language becomes a lingua franca, and then we can
Excellent.
go on from there.
Yes, most excellent. All right. There's a lot of things that can cause a language to become a lingua franca. Back in the ye old days, when it was a matter of like long distance trading and people had to like communicate like with people who were from very different groups, the lingua franca would either be some sort of like mishmash of languages, or it would be usually just whatever the dominant language was. And so at one point, traders were just like very very adept in a bunch of different languages because they needed it for a bunch of different regions. But as people got more connected and certain people got into power economically, politically, socially, colonialism became a thing. We saw more and more groups and bigger powers having more control, and their languages became more dominant and more popular.
Yes, I think that's a very kind of diplomatic and broad take on it. I would be a little bit more direct and say like conquest and war is a huge reason why languages become lingua francas.
That too.
That too. And you said colonialism, which
Colonialism.
definitely
Colonialism in
falls
like
into that
big bold
category.
letters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Big
like
bold
when
letters.
it comes to like English, you have started out maybe in the British Empire, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
that spread and then made colonies all over the world, right? You have French and Spanish that spread as they pushed out other groups in the Americas and kind of took control as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a huge reason. But like you said, trade is also a massive thing, political
Trade
reasons.
is also a thing. It's also like if we consider because when we're talking about these kinds of things, we're usually doing it from a very Western perspective as well. And I want to just kind of keep that in mind that this lingua francas are like a very Western idea, but it's not necessarily limited to Western civilization, right?
Well, let's
Um,
give a couple examples of non-Western
yes, I
ones.
will. I'm gonna talk about India and China
Okay.
because those are two very interesting countries that have had certain lingua francas pushed in their own regions for different reasons. So within India, there is a pretty extensive class system, and this class system has a bunch of different tiers to it, and there's a bunch of different I don't have the ability to go super in depth about it, but the class system and the way the class system works and the way that it was developed and the way that different like warlords kind of came and rose into power brought Hindi into the forefront of like the languages, because there are hundreds of languages within India that are in use and that people use, but Hindi is the lingua franca of pretty much all of India because of this like robust class system that exists, as well as like we said, conquest and stuff. So intricate class systems can be a part of it too. Another example is in China. In China, again, it is a massive country with a bunch of different varieties and dialects of like Chinese and different languages. But because of nationalism and because of this push for a like unified Chinese identity, Mandarin Chinese has been pushed as the lingua franca in not only China, but in other like extensions and like political stuff as well, because of this like heavy nationalism and because of this like push for that sort of a thing. So while we're coming from this from like a Western perspective as well, like, and so colonialism is definitely the thing that has pushed English as a hugely global language. Other countries have their own lingua francas that exist for their own different reasons outside of pure colonialism.
Definitely. And I want to throw a couple other things onto that as well.
Please, please.
So I think another good example of a lingua franca would be Arabic.
Yes, yes. Oh, that's another good one.
Yeah. So some people might argue that different dialects of Arabic are actually totally different languages. But
Yes.
the thing with Arabic is
There
that
is there's a midline that runs through, and that's classical Arabic.
But the main thing with Arabic is that because the Quran, the holy book of Islam, was written in Arabic, it's a religious thing
Yes.
for the countries in the Middle East and for Muslims in general to speak Arabic. And so it's spread not just through conquest, so there were definitely wars and things, but
100%.
also just with the spread of the religion itself.
Yes.
And there's other languages that have also spread because of religion.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Latin for one. Oh, we talked about Latin. Latin was originally like a Mediterranean language that snuck its way into English because of like, of course, like conquest and religion, and people like Roman Catholics coming up into England and conquering all of those things. So, like again, it's like even the language that we know and love and use as a lingua franca was at one point under the influence of another lingua franca that colored and shaped it.
Definitely. Yeah, so those are definitely more examples of lingua francas that aren't, just Western.
Yeah.
But it's a thing that's existed throughout time, is, through conquest, through trade, through cultural spread, different languages gain more traction and become learned and are learned more widely. And then I think something else I want to say specifically with English that I think is different than for, when a lot of these languages took hold, is that with the internet and with popular culture, like
Yeah.
movies from Disney and Hollywood,
Mm-hmm.
those make it easier for a language and a culture to spread to different
Mm-hmm.
areas than previously. And those can also be used to the advantage of minority languages. But a lot of people, like I've met people who learned English through TV.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. They're everywhere. As the United States of America became a technological innovator and an economic powerhouse and started distributing an insane amount of media, like it became a force to be reckoned with globally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's what a lingua franca is and how several of them have spread. Something else I want to touch on though is like what is the impact of a lingua franca on non-lingua francas and on individuals?
Yes. Okay. This is fantastic. Because I have been thinking about this a lot. I think about this constantly, like every day. And I recently came back from Europe. I spent some time in Europe, and having English as my primary language, but having it used as like a lingua franca in other countries was wild. Like the amount of privilege that I have as an English speaker, insane. And so I've had this at like the forefront of my brain for a while. So English as like an influence can be dangerous. It can be very powerful in connecting people across the world, in generating communication and ideas, but if a language like English holds more prestige than the local language, than a person's individual mother language that they were like raised with, that language can die. And it has been the case that many languages have died because English or another language came in and pushed it out. And so English, along with a bunch of other languages, Russian being one of them, Hindi can be one of them, Mandarin Chinese can be one of them, Arabic is definitely one of them as well. These languages can come in and kill some of these like smaller languages, unbeknownst to the communities around them, because of all of these influence, because you need to use the language to like communicate with the world. Like if your language is just not in use, it can die out so quick in a matter of a couple generations or less.
Yeah. I just want to put this into a little bit more context. So there's like approximately 7,000 languages that we know of in the world,
Yeah,
right?
it's getting to be less, but yeah.
That's maybe not the most recent number. I haven't looked it up on Ethnologue super recently.
It's okay. It's closer to the 6,000 than the 7,000.
Okay, we're gonna do a quick little bit of research so that I'm sharing accurate information here. Let me see if I can find on Ethnologue.
Ethnologue, for some of those who know, is like one of the main resources for linguists and language enthusiasts, and is a good gives us a good idea of the amount of documentation that's out there about languages around the world.
Yes, Ethnologue is a fantastic reference for languages as a whole. So on ethnologue.com, so on their main page, it currently says search 7,168 living languages.
Okay, pop off, King. Let's go.
Yeah, so it's one of those things. It's going to depend on who you talk to. There's
It
also not
is.
clear lines always between languages and dialects and how you count these
And it's
things.
also kind of complicated with language death because some languages may still be alive but severely endangered, but they're still considered living for like that last little bit there. So like when you consider a language dead is a little bit, it's sad and it's hard because you have to keep track of, there's usually just like one person left and you have to like,
Mm-hmm.
once that person dies then the language is dead, but up until that one person dies it's still technically alive. So there's a bunch of weird lines that aren't very clear on all
So
of these
yes,
fronts.
but the point that I wanted to make here, if we come back from our little tangent,
Uh-huh,
there
uh-huh.
are approximately 7,000 languages in the world,
Mm-hmm.
which is crazy because the ones that most people think of are there's like five that most people generally think of, right? If
Mm.
you're just thinking of like big languages off the top of your head, but there's like 7,000, so
Yeah, there's a lot.
there's a ton of languages in the world, and so a lot of those are maybe they're spoken in smaller areas by smaller populations. Some of them are endangered at risk of totally dying out, like Stacey mentioned. But what can happen and what that might actually look like is you have, individuals. And I had someone that I worked with briefly was a Russian minority. She was a Buryat, which is like a Mongolian minority in
Mm.
Russia. And she said that she did not speak Buryatsky, the native language of her parents and grandparents, because Russian is what's spoken in schools.
Yeah.
And I asked her, hey, like, do you want to speak Buryatsky? And she was like, why would I? Like,
Yeah.
there's no point. There's no reason. There's gonna be no
Yeah.
material gain for me in my life by speaking this minority language of my parents when the world around me is in Russian.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you look at the individuals, like there's individuals in the US who speak Navajo, who speak,
Mhm.
lots of other languages. And there's big movements to bring some of those, languages more into the mainstream and to have more people learn them. There's, apps and online programs that are trying to help people learn those languages. But at the end of the day, if you're looking at an individual and their motivations, and if they're saying, hey, I can't have any actual benefit from speaking and learning this language when the world around me is in this lingua franca,
Yeah.
that's going to lead to the language dying out.
Yep. Yep. And it's just one of those unfortunate tragedies that we see consistently. And that, I mean, that attitude is not pervasive everywhere, like you mentioned. There, like for example, Maori on the island of Aotearoa, or otherwise known as New Zealand, is a great example of how English was becoming a huge dominant force, and really killing Maori. And so much so that to say that it was even killing like the Maori people in a lot of ways. But because the Maori people were dedicated and really focused on bringing their language back, they've done a great job of making sure that their people are represented, that their children are learning the language. They developed a really cool system called language nests, where they have these older folks, they have the elders who basically teach preschool to the children, so the children can learn Maori and can grow up with it. And now Maori has become, they have like official documentation, and different like court systems are run in Maori. Like the language has come back in such a big, beautiful way. And that's not going to be the case with every language, but it's beautiful to see it when it does.
Right. And that's a really good example of, a lot of people do have a high level of pride in their culture and in their language. And that's one of the things that can, protect these languages from dying out.
Yeah, yeah. So in shifting kind of away from language death, because we could have an entire episode just about language death, and I've got lots of thoughts of and feelings and opinions on the matter, and there's a lot to be said about language death. But kind of pivoting back to your original question, how else does a lingua franca influence the languages and the people around it? Another fantastic example is pidgins and creoles. And we see this like this used to be something that was considered, oh, this was a thing that only happened when people first met each other, when there was like initial colonialization of, oh, the languages just met and so now they're like a thing. But no, like creoles and pidgins are still very much a thing. They're still being created, and they're getting like creoles are becoming actual languages. So one of those is like Singapore English, for example. That started as a pidgin, which then became a creole, and now it is like a full system to where Singapore English is a separate, distinct, unique language that is based in both like the like Chinese and English, and is this beautiful thing of its own, like it's its own language. So we're
Yeah,
seeing new languages come about because of lingua francas as well. So even though we have
right.
language death, we also are seeing language birth.
Now, I just want to take a really quick pause and step back a moment for anyone who's not familiar with like what a pidgin and a creole are. Like super quick definition. So a pidgin is what happens when multiple languages meet and a new language is like formed. People start speaking in a mix of
Highly,
those.
yeah, highly functional in initially. It's very simple, not complex at all. Pidgins are very simple.
Mhm. And then a Creole is when children start learning that pidgin as a native language and it actually becomes like a complete language in a sense, then that
Yeah.
becomes a Creole.
Yes, yes. And then the line between where a Creole and then like an own independent language. Now that's an even fuzzier line that like linguists are like, man, it's hard to say.
But we do have languages being created that way, which
Yeah,
is a cool and an interesting thing to
yeah.
come up.
And when you think about it, English in and of itself is a Creole. And like we say this all the time, like English is a bastardization of Germanic and Latin languages, and that's because
Mhm.
it was a Creole initially. It was the pidgin that became a Creole, and now it's a global force to be reckoned with that's creating its own pidgins and Creoles of its own. Oh, what a big, beautiful what a little baby English grown up so much. Oh, it's going on and creating new languages of its own.
Oh my gosh, that's one way to describe it. Yeah. So let's dive just a little bit more into that question of like how the lingua franca impacts the languages around it. So we've talked about like how it can take over and how, people defend their languages, but you also have things like loan words
Mm-hmm.
are super common from the lingua franca into other languages, but also
Yeah.
like vice versa. So
Yeah.
like loan words go in both directions. Like an example
Yes.
might be English and Spanish. Like, sure, there's a bunch of words that have gone from English to Spanish. Like the word for computer is computadora.
Mm-hmm.
But then, we have a ton of words that we've also brought from the Spanish language. Like the first ones that are coming to mind for me right now are food related.
Taco, burrito, amigo.
Yeah, people use those words all the time. And so the loan words do go both directions. And, there's language purists that want to avoid loan
French.
words.
French. They're just
French is definitely
notorious.
a
They're just
main one.
notorious.
We've talked about their language academy.
Yeah. The language academy is bad. The French people love French people. The language academy I have issues with. Let's just put that out there. I like French people. I don't like the the language academy.
Right, we're all authorized to have opinions.
Yes.
It's all good.
Just don't want any of our French listeners out there to think that I don't like them. I do. I do like you. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, Stacy is everyone's friend.
I try.
But yeah, I think loan words are a huge one where you'll see that a lot in all sorts of languages. What are other ways that you can think of where, the lingua franca impacts other languages? Because you can actually have like the grammar itself be impacted, like the syntax.
Mm-hmm.
You can have, every level of language can be impacted by,
Yeah.
multiple languages coming in contact with each other.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, loan words for sure. The different syntax structures are definitely one of them. And this kind of comes back to how creoles and pidgins are created. And it really kind of is on a case by case basis of like what, depending on which, like what things the languages have to offer each other, what will they kind of like borrow, right? So languages that may be a little bit more phonologically, phonetically simple, they might take more of the grammatical structure from English and preserve some of the like phonological simplicity for the sake of just like convenience, right? Like it takes so much effort to add all of these new fancy sounds. We're going to just keep the sounds simple, but then we'll incorporate some of the other grammatical structures. Or it could be vice versa of like, oh, we already have a lot of these sounds. So we already have a lot of these structures. So like in more Germanic languages, like, oh, we already have a lot of these structures. So we'll just borrow some more of like the sounds from it, or we'll borrow this and that and the third. So it really is kind of on a case by case basis based on like how the two are interacting. There are people out there who study specifically like, oh, well, if these languages came into contact, how would they clash, and how can like what do we predict that this combination will kind of like turn out to be in 10, 15, 20, 2500 years from now. There are people who are looking into that, but it is because languages are unique and highly individualized, it's kind of hard to tell just like right off the bat like what you might see, but it does trickle down from like the pragmatics of just word borrowing or the occasional phrase here and there, all the way down to like, oh, we're not even like the English th sound, the that's way too hard. We're just gonna not with that. We'll just keep that out, and then that can change how the language kind of structures or handles certain things, because if that th sound is like super prevalent, then you might have to shift other aspects of the phonology to account for the lack of that sound. So
I love that, like, it is always, it depends. But I like the way that you're saying, like, hey, let's take this thing, let's do this thing. And I want to draw the same distinction that I did in our previous episode of like, there is both the subconscious and the conscious, like the accidental and the deliberate when it comes to this kind of language change. And so you have individuals who are like, oh, I like this word. I think it's easier to use this English word than it is to describe this thing in whatever language you're talking about. Therefore, I'm going to consciously make this choice. I'm going to be a rebel. I'm going to use the English. But then you also have, like, sometimes people don't even notice these things around them. They just hear somebody else say it. They pick it up. It comes naturally. It is easy. And then they use it. Maybe like a famous personality, like a musician or a politician uses this word and phrase, and then it catches on. So you have lots of processes that impact how these different words and structures are brought into a language. And at the end of the day, it's a very complicated process. And it's not like there's a simple answer of like, this is the way that it happens, because there's all sorts of factors that are mingling with each other, all sorts of different groups that are using language in different ways and interacting with each other. And it's all very alive and dynamic.
Yeah, I would like to give one example specifically about a more conscious change that happens and that we're seeing happen in the expansion of English as a lingua franca. So some of the examples I gave about like sound change or the word borrowing, like the whole Spanish or French borrowing technology words, that can kind of happen like on a subconscious level. That doesn't necessarily have to be explicit, but with certain social movements you can see more explicit transfers being done. And the one that we're seeing predominantly is the one about like gender, for example, and gendered language. There's a lot of discussion, especially with queer people and non-binary people and others within communities that have highly gendered languages, like the Romance languages, people discussing how to handle like being non-binary and non-binary pronouns, and like some people are pushing for the incorporation of English's they them pronouns into their own language, which like big push, babes. Like it's with these, like, pronouns are one of those, this is like a very interesting phenomenon from a linguistic perspective, because pronouns are highly resistant to change given how functional that they are. But because this has been such like a huge social movement, we're seeing like explicit action being done for people to push their own opinions and thoughts about what pronouns should be used in their languages, and like how that should be done. And so it's very interesting to see, because it's like, I don't think, I mean, I've in my lifetime, I've never seen any explicit language change quite this extreme. And I can't say anything about like other political or social movements because I haven't been around for those, and I don't know that we have a ton of documentation about that sort of thing. But this is a very special time in the world where this highly functional aspect of grammar is hotly contested in multiple languages.
Absolutely. And that's a really interesting one also because it is so controversial.
It is. And there's
There's
a lot of thoughts and
people.
feelings, and here's the one thing, there's no right answer for any of this.
Exactly. Yeah. And I want to throw out there because I've heard some people argue that this is just like Americans and English speakers putting their thoughts and ideas on like Spanish
No,
and Portuguese,
no.
but it's not.
The people in those communities, and I've seen this on like TikTok and stuff, the people in these communities are also pushing for this. And are also pushing for things. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I know plenty of like native Spanish speakers, maybe even like for Spanish, people who aren't associated with the LGBTQ plus community at all,
Mm-hmm.
but who are pushing to have things like, let's say, ellas y ellos, to say they and they, both the feminine and the masculine, instead of just bunching everything up into the masculine. And it's not just like, us white Americans talking about this and spreading
Yeah.
this trend. It is truly a very broad trend.
Yeah.
And native speakers of the language feel opinionated and are also pushing on both sides of it. There's some people
Mm-hmm.
that are like, what on earth are you doing? Spanish works the way that it is. Why are we making a big deal out of it? Just keep using the masculine for everything because it's inclusive. And then you also have people that are like, no, we should be using the feminine and the masculine and also adding in a non-binary neutral option.
Yeah.
And so it's a really massive, very controversial discussion in a lot of ways that it's not going to instantly resolve itself, and
No.
some of these things are not going to be accepted
Yeah.
universally very quickly at all, but the language change is happening. Like the usage of these different ways of speaking, different ways of using Spanish gendered grammar, they're spreading.
Yeah. And I mean, the emphasis I would like to make here is just that it's happening so explicitly. This is like, it is rare to see language change happen in such an explicit way. And even more so with the amount of social media and the amount of just global communication. This is like the first time that we're seeing explicit language change on such a global scale
Without the element of conquest.
without the element of conquest. This is purely like a social change. And I mean, I'm sure there are some political dynamics to it, and
There's
we're not
other
gonna.
examples. Like
Of
there
course.
definitely are, but it's
Of
a
course.
big one and it's an active one right now.
Yes, it's a big active one. And I like, because I am not a native speaker of a lot of these languages, I have no right to say or assert an opinion one way or the other. And I think you agree with me on that front. So we will refrain from opinions on those. But it is like, the one thing I will say is it's going to be very interesting to see how it turns out. Like, I am an active observer of this change, and I'm very just curious and invested to see what happens.
On that note, when we're talking about, the future and observing what happens, I have another broad question about lingua francas for you.
Let's go.
What do you think is going to be the next lingua franca? And how
Ooh,
far do you think it
spicy.
can spread? So this is actually two questions.
Okay. Yeah.
But like I can imagine, some sci-fi universe, right, where
Mm-hmm.
you have the lingua franca that it just expands and expands until there's only a single language in the universe, which
Highly doubtful.
I know. I
Humans
don't think it would
love
ever
being
happen.
different. I personally don't believe in a world where there's only going to be one language. Like, no, come on. People are way too complicated for that.
Yes, I agree with you, but I wanted to throw it out as like an
Yeah.
extreme hypothetical option.
Yes.
Or you have the other extreme where it's like everybody's like, we have technology, we don't need lingua franca at all. We can just all speak our own languages and have computers interpret everything we say.
That's a very spicy topic. Now we're getting into some imagination lands. I will say, as a linguist and as a person who is like observing a lot of these things right now, there is some speculation that Mandarin Chinese might become a lingua franca.
I have heard some people conjecture around that.
Yes. And this mostly comes from the idea that, like, if the United States of America were to suddenly stop being a global power, then things might shift and change. Or, like, if China were to stand up and do more things in terms of, like, economics and business and all of this other stuff, then that could be pushed as a lingua franca as well. Of course, there are also speculations about Russia having a similar effect, but it's up again. It's like up. It's one of those things of like, if you're following global politics and you're talking about lingua francas, and you're like, okay, well, if we're assigning lingua francas based on who's in power, then yeah, sure, Russian and Chinese might be up there on the list. Theoretically, though, any language could become a lingua franca if it gets big enough.
Icelandic.
If they wanted to, it's unlikely. It's like it's a statistical unlikelihood, just given like a numbers game. There's just like
Mm-hmm.
a huge number of English speakers because you've got the UK, you've got South Africa, you've got Australia, you've got the United States. That's billions of people that are speaking English on top of the billions of people that are speaking Chinese. Um, it could also be that, like, if India like popped up and just popped off all of a sudden, we could have Hindi as a global language as well, which I'm like, hey, I'm down for it.
Mm-hmm.
So it could also just be like a numbers game, of
Right.
just like, if something were to happen and the numbers flipped the switch, you could see something else.
Mm-hmm.
Those would be my guesses right off the bat. However, English has a pretty strong foothold. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna be a while. And I would speculate even that, EJ, you and I might not see the next lingua franca in our lifetime, just given the intense foothold that English has had and has built over the past century or two.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
it's just, I mean, we can speculate all we like, but it's not something that you or I would see, I don't think.
I agree with that point, partly because like there are several countries around the world that have English as a native language, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the UK, Australia, the US, there's lots of other places where people speak a lot of English. And I don't personally foresee it like dying in popularity anytime soon, especially because, so many Europeans speak English as a second language and are using
Mm-hmm.
it so actively internationally.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't foresee another language taking its place. And something that I would add on to that is like when you think about it, I threw out Icelandic in jest, but let's use it for a little thought experiment,
For
right?
sure.
Like
Let's play around.
let's play around. What would it take for Icelandic to become a lingua franca, right? Because it's not just a question of like people need to start wanting to speak it. Like you need to have
Yeah.
teachers all over the world
Yes.
that are actually teaching in schools. You need to have schools that are offering it as a language. So many schools right now, even if they do offer languages, which not all schools do,
Mm-hmm.
they offer a limited choice of maybe 3 languages. Like maybe it's French, German, and Spanish, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kind of talking from experience of what I've seen as an American, right? This is going to be, again, very biased, and I fully acknowledge that there's areas in the world that don't speak English at all.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to over exaggerate and think we're saying anything that we aren't. But in order for Icelandic to become a lingua franca, you would need people expansively to not only have the desire because they see the economic and political gain that can be had from speaking the language, but they also need the access and the practice.
Yes.
And right now, if you want to learn Icelandic, that's gonna, like, there are resources online.
Mm-hmm.
There's some excellent resources online where you can learn some Icelandic, but it's gonna be very difficult to actually get the practice and the teaching and everything that you would need as an individual to learn it, let alone as a nation or as a world.
Yes. Something else we would have to see is Icelanders going out into the world and building their own robust communities that specifically function with that language and specifically function with Icelandic, and developing and establishing communities outside of the country itself as like hubs and focal points for cultural and linguistic dissemination. Because when you think about English, for example, again, English started off from a teeny tiny little island, just like Icelandic did, but it had dissemination through religion, through colonialism, and that colonialism specifically, we've seen this in other areas as well. That, but even just establishing communities can help to preserve and spread language. We see this with things like Chinatowns, right? In areas that have large communities that are focused on preserving and maintaining cultural identity, we do see that language being more prevalent in the area, in more use, and can be spread out more across the world than if people were to just stay locally. So
Mm-hmm.
Iceland would have to have a pretty big export of people, along with an export of power, economics, technology, all of this other stuff. Because at the end of the day, technology and power and money are one thing, but people power is undeniable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I love Icelandic. I love Icelandic culture, and
You've been
everything.
talking about it a lot, which is cute. I love it.
Well, I just wanted to throw it out as like a theoretical example, just to like
we love a good
get
thought
people to think a little bit.
experiment. Yeah, we love a good thought experiment. But it is kind of cool.
Yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to bring up with lingua francas? I think we touched on a wide array of related topics.
We touched on a wide array of topics, and I feel like we did a pretty good job covering all of it. I think we did good. I love how we always have this little like wind down at the end of our episodes of like, so are we done talking? Yeah, I think we're done talking.
Well, and for our listeners, part of that is that we do not script our episodes.
We
so
do
like
not,
literally
yeah.
a couple minutes before we started talking about this, we're like, hey, what should we talk about? You know what? Let's talk about this thing. And so we literally didn't plan anything out. We're using our own experience as linguists and as our experiences in the world to discuss these topics and hope that everybody gets a little bit of learning and enjoyment from listening to it.
So but yes, I think we covered this topic pretty well, pretty extensively. But I'd love to hear thoughts from our listeners about lingua francas. Is there a language that you would like to see become a global powerhouse in the next 500 years or so? What language might we be speaking in space?
Ooh. On that note, thanks for listening. Leave us a rating and review. Follow us at For the Love of Language on Instagram.
Slide into our DMs and tell us what you think.
You made that sound pretty creepy. Till next time.
Bye.